All right, so ready to go back and bolt on the spacer plates, the control bodies, solenoid pack, and ultimately finish up the trans. So first thing I want to do is point out check ball locations. So there's 8 total in the 4R100. So we have a check ball here, and these are all 5/16 by the way. Check ball here, and then going across the mid case, we have 5 additional check balls, one here, 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 and here. Then we got 2 more check balls right here, and then one in the bathtub here. So if you're working on an E4OD from 89 to 95, you would also have a check ball here in this bathtub, and then if you were working on a 1989 E4OD specifically, you would have a check ball in this location as well as roughly in this location here. Now the 4R100s aren't provisioned for those, but in the case of the 89, which is 1 year only this applies to, just 1989 units, this check ball is steel. The rest of them are all Torlon. So the first thing we want to do is reinstall all of our valve body alignment studs. So we got 1 tall one and then 4 other ones which are all the same size and not as long. So the long one or tall one is going to go on this location right here. And with all of them, you want to put the short side thread facing down. Just thread it in. And then the rest of them are going to go in their other respective locations, which are 2 here on the pan rail. And then we got 2 more on the other side. So we got 1 here. And then lastly, we have 1 over here. Now you could tell, if you weren't sure, but you can tell based on the inset. So all these other bolt holes have threads going almost to the top, but the studs do not. The threads are countersunk much deeper, into the case bore in their respective locations. So it's pretty obvious once you're over the case and you're looking down on it like this, you know where they go. So what I'll do is I'll just take a pair of vice grips and snug them up. You don't have to get crazy, but you don't want them loose either. So just make sure they're all the way down, and then kind of just snug them. And you don't need them too tight. You don't want to, you're not trying to torque these things to 15 foot-pounds or anything like that. They just need to be good and snug so that they're not going to move once you put the control bodies back onto the case. And this ensures that when you put everything back on, these will be reliable anchor points. Reliable anchor points for your fasteners. In this case, the 10mm nuts. All right, next you're going to install your EPC relief valve and your filter. So the EPC relief valve goes right here in this location, and the particular valve that we're installing is part of the Transgo kit. Originally there is a check ball, but we delete the check ball and we replace it with the Transgo valve. Then we will go ahead and install the filter screen here in this location in the case. Some E4ODs come with these, but then some do not. So if yours does not take one, then you obviously won't use it. Next thing I'll talk about are the gaskets. If you're using a Transtech kit, or your overall kit comes with Transtech gaskets, Transtech includes two different sets of valve body gaskets with the with the 4R100 E4OD kits. On my left hand here is the E4OD gasket. It is identified by a green stripe, whereas the 4R100s, all of the gaskets have a white stripe. So we're going to be using the white stripe gaskets today. So first thing you want to do is install your case gasket. And you just want to make sure that the gasket is laying flush against the case itself. And what you're seeing down here is the intermediate servo. So it's pressing up against it a little bit, but when we put the valve bodies on, it more or less holds it in place. All right, next thing we're going to do is install the main spacer plate. So a couple things I want to go over before we do. So Transgo has you do two different things here on the main spacer plate. First, they have you install an Orifice plug at this location, and then they have you drill up to 310 thousandths inch holes, and they specify the locations in their instructions. Now, the Orifice plug is such that you install it from this side, and then you more or less peen it, kind of flare it out like this using a 1/4-inch check ball, steel check ball. You essentially tap down on the plug with a hammer on top of the check ball with this on the bench. And then you're gonna, tap it until the other side of the little plug is flared out, so it stays in the plate. Now, as I said, there was up to 3 holes. This plate only has 2 of the 3 holes that Transgo mentions. So if it does not have all 3 holes, you're only going to drill the holes that are actually on the plate. You're not going to add any additional holes to this plate. All right, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to install the low reverse hold down plate. So that's 3 8mm bolts. And then all the bolts and or nuts for the control bodies and solenoid pack all receive between 80 and 100 inch-pounds. I actually like to go 85. That's usually more than enough torque. And that'll keep everything in place. At the same time, you don't have to worry about potentially stripping out a thread or causing any bind-ups with the valve bodies. All right, so next thing we need to do is install the spacer plate to valve body gasket. And then the last plate that we're going to install on the case itself is going to be the calibration plate that comes with the kit. So the calibration plate is intended for the builder to set up the shift firmness for the 1, 2, 2, 3, and 3, 4 upshifts based on how the vehicle is set up and, you know, use case, application, and all that. So for typical 4-100 with diesel applications that are using a stock stall in their converter and or otherwise, you know, mild performance builds, you know, such as this one, the hole sizes I like to use are 110 thousandths for the 1-2 upshift, 82 thousandths for the 2-3 upshift, and then 86 thousandths for the 3-4 upshift. Now the kit has you use, if you're running like a custom low stall, for example, in a vehicle designed to be, you know, a heavy hauler or tow vehicle, something like that, you know, really hard use work truck. If you're working with a custom low stall, they recommend you start with the V6 hole sizes and, you know, kind of work your way up from there. So depending upon exactly what you're running, if that, you know, if that case applies to you, you'll probably want to start small and then move up in, say, 10 thousandths of an inch increments until the transmission's shifting the way that you or the vehicle operator likes it or prefers. So anyway, that's the calibration plate. That is something that's exclusive to the Transgo kits. It obviously doesn't come from the factory, and I don't know if anyone else uses it, you know, anything like it, but it does give you a lot of flexibility in terms of how you want to set up the quality of the shifts. All right, so before we start putting on control bodies, we want to install the main solenoid pack filter, and that goes in this location right here. All right, so we'll start off with the main valve body. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we have the actuator arm here on the rooster comb engaged with the manual valve. So we'll just kind of come in like this. And then just drop it on in. All right, so on top of the main valve body, there's 4 check balls. So we have a 5/16 check ball here and here. And then we have a 1/4 inch check ball location in the bathtub. And then another 1/4 inch check ball goes right here. Next, we'll put on our auxiliary spacer plate. No gaskets, just the plate, and then the auxiliary valve body. Next, the accumulator body. So you just line up the straight edge right here along with the back side of the main valve body, and then the cutout will correspond to that, same in the case. Last thing we'll install is the solenoid pack. So just make sure you lube up the new O-ring on the pack. And then you're just going to drop it gently into place and kind of apply a little bit of downward pressure to seat it fully and onto the case surface, getting the O-ring into the bore for the case connector. All right, so the first fasteners I like to install are the 5 10mm nuts that go on top of the studs. You can install them, but you don't need to, you know, run them down just yet, because I actually run these down last. Just want to get them in place so I don't forget about them. Okay. Next, I'm going to install the 2 short bolts that go in these 2 locations here through the auxiliary valve body that get threaded into the main valve body. These long bolts, and there are 7 of these. They go through the auxiliary and main valve bodies and into the case. Next is the bolts for the solenoid pack. These are all Torx 30. Alright, then the rest of the bolts are all the same length, and they just basically go throughout the rest of the remaining locations on the main valve body and accumulator body. Just make sure that they're all started, and then you can zip them down with an 1-inch-pound impact. And I'd recommend, if you're going to do it that way, like I'm going to do it, you want to use medium to low power setting. Because it doesn't take much to get them in. It also doesn't take much to strip out threads. So all the bolts are 8mm, and then the nuts, of course, are 10mm. Right, next I'll do the bolts in the solenoid pack. So again, just before you start zipping them down, make absolutely sure that this pack is fully seated, or it's as seated as much as you can get it. It may seat just a little bit more once you crank the bolts down, but you don't want to be seating the solenoid block with the bolts by themselves. So same 85 inch-pounds. As far as torque sequence is concerned, what I personally like to do is I'll start here with the auxiliary valve body bolts, you know, with these four in particular, and then I'll kind of work my way out and then kind of go, you know, crisscross until I get to, you know, the perimeter bolts. So kind of center, then this direction, and then I get to these ones typically last. Accumulator body, I like to go right down the middle with these four bolts, and then I'll start going crossways with the rest of them. And then the solenoid pack, same deal, in the middle with these four, and then work my way out. But again, that's the way I like to do it. Can't recall if the book gives any particular guidance, but I don't recall anything specific. Main thing is you don't want to over torque these bolts. I mean, 100 inch-pounds is kind of borderline too aggressive in my opinion. I try to keep it between 85 and 90, just, you know, as a general guideline. Bolts are not going to come loose at 85 inch-pounds of torque or 90 inch-pounds. In fact, they probably stay put at 75 inch-pounds. Looks like I missed one. So, no need to be too aggressive. So just check them all before moving on. It's okay if you miss one or two. I mean, as you can see, I've missed a couple. And then the other thing too is that the gasket will have to compress. So you may think you got it on the first pass, but then it'll, you know, when you run it again, you'll still be able to travel before it takes full torque. All right, so accumulator body, I'll just start with the middle bolt. All right, next up is the solenoid block, or pack, whatever you want to call it. All right, now we'll do the nuts. All right, everything looks good. Manual valve moves when the selector is moved, so all things equal, everything should work when it's fired up. Go ahead and lube up your filter. This is a deep pan filter. Some transmissions will take a shallow pan filter, but this one's a deep one, so make sure you get the right one. And that's, of course, based on your pan. I'm going to go ahead and reuse this factory gasket as opposed to the one that came in the kit. I like these a little bit better. They are reusable, so, I mean, unless it gets melted or somehow destroyed, it can be reused pretty much as many times as need be. Okay, I think this takes something like 20 pan bolts. Yep, 20 on the nose. All the pan bolts are 10 millimeter, although this particular transmission, there was a 12 millimeter bolt. And I guess was missing one, and I actually don't have a spare at the moment, so and here it is. But it is the correct thread pitch and length, so we'll run with it. And with respect to the pan, don't forget the magnet. Magnet was in there. I didn't show it, but it was in there. that last 12mm bolt. Okay, pan's on. We're looking good. Pretty much all set with this unit. Okay, so we have the extension housing. This one's cast iron. It's fairly heavy. So you're gonna line up your parking pole pin right here. And then just put some assembly lube on the case to hold the gasket in place. And what I'm doing is I'm using the 2 longest bolts to get it started. And they go right here on the bottom, like by the transmission mount bolt hole locations. And then just install the rest of them and then torque them up once you got them all in there. All right, so the extension housing gets 35 foot-pounds. Book calls for 30 to 40. I just do 35, so kind of right in the middle. And I'll try to work, you know, kind of in a crisscross pattern, if you will. And I think some of these bolts on this side, it's going to be tough to get their torque wrench in there. All right, so the extension housing gets 35 foot-pounds. Book calls for 30 to 40. I just do 35, so kind of right in the middle. And I'll try to work, you know, kind of in a crisscross pattern, if you will. I think some of these bolts on this side, it's going to be tough to get their torque wrench in there. Let's see, I was able to get to that one. Let's see if I can get to this one. I don't think so. And this last one's got a stud, so I'm gonna need a deeper socket. And then I'll use a swivel to get at it. Okay. I'll clean up that later. But here's a replacement gasket for it. It goes on like that when it goes back in.